Hey class! So today we will be going over how to import Rhino geometry into Revit and a little bit of how to manipulate it, how to create some conceptual masses from them, and also how to manipulate their materials. This is really good, and while I'm talking I will get Rhino open. Um, this is really good if you have really complex geometry that Rhino is much better suited to do and to create, but want to import it into your Revit file to integrate into your project, to add a little bit more of your typical building elements, your detailing, all that stuff, to develop your construction documents from. So we will go to New and then Large Objects, Feet. Make sure that your units are in feet. And then we're just going to create a really simple box geometry for right now. So I just grabbed my rectangle tool. I'll do a 60 foot by 20 foot rectangle that'll extrude up 20 feet. I'll go and change it to ghosted. And obviously this is not something that you would typically import into Revit because you can easily create this with a conceptual mass. What we're going to do is we are going to manipulate one of these surfaces. So we are going to explode this box into its 6 different surfaces. And then we'll use a command called rebuild. What this does is it rebuilds the control points of the surface. So I'm going to change the point count. U being 6 and V being 6. Don't worry about the degrees or any of this other thing. Just worry about changing the U and the V point counts. Press OK. It'll look like this. And what we'll then do is turn the control points on by typing in points on. That'll bring that up. And then we can then go in and select a couple of the points and just bring them out. And we can probably, we can manipulate one of these a little bit more, maybe bring this guy in a little bit, just create a little bit of variation. Let's bring this guy in. Actually, let's bring this guy in, get a little bit of the top going. All right, so if we go to a render view, you can see it's not the most complex of geometries, but it is something that is definitely not easy to do in Revit. So we'll use this as a base. So what we can do from here is we will join this back up so it's a solid. You can import singular surfaces into Revit, but the chances of success somewhat go down. And also the amount that you can manipulate it, the potential of creating a conceptual mass from it goes down significantly. Also, you'll need a solid if you want to do any sort of, mass floors or do anything of that sort. So we'll join all of these surfaces back together and create one solid closed perfect poly surface. And then we will go to File, Export Selected. Oh, before I do that, sorry. One thing that I want to make you guys aware of. So when you import CAD files and Rhino files into Revit, it will read the layer information. We'll get a little bit more into that later on. But for right now, what I want you to do is I want you to rename this layer bump material, and I want you to change the object to that layer so it's red. Okay, so when you have that done, go to File or select the geometry, File, Export Selected, and then in your comp prac we want to select AutoCAD. So it can read Rhino files, it can read SketchUp files, it can read ACIS files or .sat files. But I find that .dwg your standard AutoCAD works the best. It has the highest chance of success of importing correctly. That's just from my experience. With the newer versions, that may have updated, that may have changed, but that's just me. So I've already created one, so we can just toggle to a folder that you'll remember and save it in a location that you'll remember. I called it bump exploration, and then click save. Yes, I want to replace. And then this option window will come up. It's going to have it be on default for you guys, most likely, unless you've changed it in the past. We want to make sure it's on 2007 solids because we're exporting a solid geometry. That is the settings that work the best, that export the best for Revit. So we'll hit OK. It'll say file saved successfully. And then we can just go to, this is 2022. Excuse me, go back to my 2020. So I've just opened a new file using our template. So then I'll go into Insert tab. So Insert tab is where we can import and place these CAD files from. Two places you can do. You can do link CAD or you can do import CAD. Both are pretty much the same process. The major difference is that linking a CAD file means that you can import the geometry, place the geometry, and then if you go into your Rhino model and change anything, change the geometry, change the layers, change whatever, and then you export it again and save over that file again, you can relink that CAD file and have it live update, and it will stay in the same exact position it was in, just update with the changes that you've made. So that's really good if you know that you're going to be continuously updating the file and you're just importing for the first time. Either way works. So I'm just going to import CAD for right now. And then, I don't know what that is. Interesting. So I'm just going to do that bump exploration. If you do the drop down, you can see it has the Rhino SketchUp, DXF, all that stuff. So we will just make sure it's under DWG. And then underneath that are a couple different inputs, so you can do some settings to import it with. Colors, real simple. You want to preserve the colors. You want to import it as black and white, or for whatever reason you'd want to invert it. The layers and levels you can specify if you want certain layers to import and certain ones not to import. You can use that to choose. Import units, you can have auto detect, or if you know them, just select it. And then the two most important settings here are positioning and place at. So positioning is how it's going to import and where in the XY plane it's going to be placed. So you have a couple autos. Auto center to center, which basically takes the center of the geometry that you're importing and places it in the center of your Revit file. Origin to origin will, wherever your Rhino model is within the Rhino world environment. So this is our origin right here, 0, 0, and then it goes out X, Y. Wherever it is in relation to that origin point, it will import to the Revit origin point, which if you don't know by now, Revit does use a XYZ coordinate system, world coordinate system. It's just a little bit more hidden. It's a little more in the background, whereas Rhino is pretty front and center with its XYZ. So in any case, I typically do manuals. This will allow you to manually place it, and you'll be able to move it around before you click in place. So, and I usually do center just in case something is way far out in the distance and from your origin in Rhino, and you don't want to go looking for it. This just is in my opinion one of the better methods. And then place at. So if you have multiple levels and you want to place it on a certain level, this is where you choose. We only have the one level right now, so we'll place it there. We do have multiple, but we're only allowed to place it on one for some reason. So we'll just hit open. Oh no, import no valid. I think we might have gotten too complex for the... Oh. Maybe it's... That's 0 kilobytes, so that means it has 0. So let me just try and re-import the 13461. Okay, there we go. Much better. So there we go. I don't know why that happened. If it happened on yours, that's how to fix it. If not, it's weird. But in any case, so this is the geometry. This is how it comes in. If you select it, it's going to say import symbol and then its title. And then if I turn on, let's go to shaded real quick, then you can see a little bit better the double curved surface on the one side. And as you can see, it did import with the red color that we associated with the bump material layer in Rhino. So when you select it, there's a couple buttons up at the top. You can delete certain layers. So if you have multiple layers in here, especially with really complex 2D CAD files, sometimes you want to delete layers. We only have the one, so we'd essentially be deleting our entire file. Explode, not the best tool. If we click that, this is what happens when you have complex 3D geometry. It doesn't like that. Explode is really good when you have 2D CAD and you want to explode that 2D CAD. The CAD will come in and it'll be one file that you can click, and then if you hit explode, you can then go in and manipulate. It'll basically turn the CAD line work into Revit line work, and you can use it to manipulate within your Revit project. 3D objects, it does not like to do. And then query is simply just you select that, and then you'll select a certain element, and it'll tell you the different series of information that is associated with that object. So it'll tell you the layer and what type of object it is. If it's a line, it'll be a line. If it's a solid surface, etc. So those are the 3 different types you can do when you import it directly into the Revit environment. Obviously, that is pretty limiting. And so what you can do is you can import this geometry into a conceptual mass environment. And so if we go into massing, in place mass, so it's currently temporarily turned on the mass parameter and visibility graphics. And so if we go, we've created a mass, we go into insert, import CAD, just like we did, and do the same thing here. Manual center, we'll place it. Looks obviously pretty close to the same. However, let me see, I can't remember if, I think so if we explode this, So unlike in your main Revit browser, when you explode it in a conceptual mass, it has a little bit different of a reaction. So when you explode it, it actually explodes into manipulatable English words. You can manipulate the geometry pretty well. So it turns it into a conceptual mass that you can then manipulate. Now, from what I remember, changing the form itself, while you can do it, so if I tab in and select the entire thing, you can do it, but when it has a really complex geometry, it doesn't really know how to resolve that when you're trying to extend it. And so that's why you really want to get the geometry in its entirety pretty set in Rhino, and then when you use this process and you turn it into a conceptual mass, you're basically doing it so you can then apply or manipulate the geometry to accept Revit elements. So what I mean by that. So if we tab in and select the double curved surface, it'll give us the option up here to divide that surface. So same thing that we've been doing the last couple weeks. You'll be able to then choose a pattern, and if you have a family, a current panel pattern based family, you can apply it there. You can also, once you get out of here and if you hit finish mass, since we have that second level right here, you can actually go in and create mass floors for this. So I'll create one at level 2. And then if you go in architecture, floor, and then floor by face, you can actually create a floor. So it works just like a conceptual mass. You can apply, it's just like a conceptual mass. So you can apply, basic walls, wall by face, to it if you so choose. And ultimately, it's probably a much nicer way of a much nicer tool than trying to use Revit's conceptual mass tool. But obviously it's another step, and I'll reiterate if I haven't done so yet. Don't always bank on it importing correctly. This is a relatively simple geometry. I have done much more complex geometries, much more detailed and or large of files, like it has a lot of components, and sometimes it just does not import correctly, or it'll import some things but not the other things. So it's really important for you guys to do tests while you're doing it, if you are planning on doing this, to do tests and as you're progressing and developing the geometry, so that you're ensuring that the geometry you're creating in Rhino will actually import into the Revit environment. All right, so that being said, so we have done a couple different ways of manipulating the surface. I am going to edit in place real quick, and I'm going to undivide that surface. I can remember how I just delete, right? Yeah, just delete. Hit finish mass, and then I'm going to just apply wall by face, apply a different type of, let's just do 12-inch masonry. All right, so now you got some weird, cool, funky masonry pattern. All right, so we have this now, and if we go into our level 2 plan, and I just want to double check my view range. All right, for some reason my view range is at 20 feet, so I'll change that to 4. So at 4 feet, if we go back to our 3D view and we look at a elevation, at 4 feet it should be cutting through the geometry here, which should get some of the double curved surface in the cut. When you directly import a file into the Revit environment, directly into the base Revit environment, it doesn't cut the geometry. It's weird. I'll just be frank, it's weird. So if you're banking on it cutting through and you don't plan on using a conceptual mass, like let's say you have a piece of furniture or an object that you don't need to manipulate or apply any Revit elements tool, but you want it to cut and look correct. Importing it, if you do that and you import it and it's not cutting through, this is why. So to have it actually cut through, what you need to do is import it into a family first and then import it into your Revit project. So if we go to File, New, and then Family, and then we scroll down to just like a regular generic model. Hit open. And then do the same exact thing that we've been doing. If I change to a 3D view, go to insert, then import CAD. Zoom out a little bit. All right. So it's the same geometry, but when we go and load it into our project, or we can save it, excuse me, save it, bump, exploration, and then we'll load it back into our project and place it. You can see that now it actually cuts through, and if we change the view range, let's say to 0, it cuts through. Ooh. Oh, this is at level 1 now. Oh, I'm at level 1. Duh. If we go to level 2 and we change the view range, level 2 to 0, you can see that it adjusts and it's cutting through at that plane. So just a couple things to be cognizant of as you're using imports from Rhino or just CAD imports in general. So on to material manipulation. All right, so we have these two objects. You can't, there's no edit type. You can't apply a material to them. You cannot paint them, which we'll get into a little bit later. But what you can do is change the material associated with your layers. So like I said previously, if you are applying a material, or the layers, the Rhino layers will import, that information will import into Revit. And so just like we created the red color here, it's imported and associated a red color to the family. But if we want to change that, let's say, or we want to apply an appearance tab or an appearance material, to that object, there's a specific way to do it. And so to manipulate that, we'll go up to our Manage tab and then go to Object Styles, just to the right of Materials. And in Object Styles, it has pretty much every default setting, graphic setting it has for different components. So, all of the default materials that associate to different things, default walls, and the cut and line weights of each. But what we want is our imported objects. So if we go to imported objects, up at the top, you can see basically two areas where that layer, those layers come in. The first, this main one that's not in imports and families, this bump exploration is associated with this guy right here. Because we imported the CAD geometry directly into Revit, it basically just comes directly in here. And then it has that material associated with it. So our bump material has imported. If we change this color, let's say to green, and then we hit apply, you can see the outline has changed to green. If you have brought a geometry into a family first and then imported it into and loaded it into your base Revit project, it's going to be found under this imports and families. And that's associated with this guy down here. So if we do that and we change it to, let's say, cyan, you can see it's changed there. Now, currently it has a material associated with it. And so to manipulate that, we'll click just like every other. It has that weird ... You can see this is where our red comes from. And this is under our shading tab like usual. So we can change this and it will update. Now it's updated to both. That is because the material that is associated to both is the exact same. So if we had duplicated this and then changed this to, let's say blue, hit OK. And then hit apply, you can see it's changed here, but because this material has not changed, it's still orange. In any case, let's change this material to something a little bit more interesting. So let's do steel chrome plated for 1, and then let's see, anything interesting. I guess we'll do brick common. Doesn't matter what materials, as long as you associate different materials to the two families. So we'll see it's changed. And then if we want to see those materials a little bit more in their detail, we can change the graphic style to realistic. And then you can see it. The chrome always comes in black, but you can see it's a little shiny and glossy. So that's how that looks. All right. So I think that's it for importing Rhino geometry into Revit and manipulating it. And in the next video, we'll be taking these geometries with their different material settings and opening up Enscape and starting to get into that a little bit further. So if you want to explore that, please watch the next video.